I'm about to say something that's going to sound like I've lost my damn mind. And then I'm going to spend the next hour or so providing every single word of it in proof. There's a community college professor in Mesa, Arizona, who has committed the sons and daughters of that state to a military partnership with a Persian Gulf Sultanate. And on Monday, the President of the United States threatened to bomb the shit out of that same Sultanate. Every word of this is documented. There's photographs, there's video, and I'm going to share it all with you. So let me say it one more time again, slower. There's a woman who teaches at Mesa Community College, and in March of 2023, she flew 8,000 miles to a palace in Muscat, Oman. She sat down at the table across from the chief of staff of the Sultanate of Oman's armed forces, and she signed a document binding the Arizona National Guard to the Omani military. They train together, they're exercising together, they're deploying together, their officers are in our armories, and our guardsmen are on their soil. Arizona's sons and daughters are on the Oman and Yemeni border. You heard me. But that day when she signed that document, she wasn't a community college professor. She wore 2 stars on her collar. Her entire military career was as a lawyer. She's never commanded American troops in combat. She has never been elected to anything, not as a governor, not as a legislator, not as a senator, not a city councilwoman, not even a dog catcher. And the Arizona legislature never voted on that document that she carried and she signed. The United States Senate, they never ratified it, even though I'm going to call it what I think it is, a de facto treaty. And you can't read it. I've looked. It's not published anywhere on earth. Now, I want you to hold that in one hand because on Monday, the President of the United States got on the phone with a Fox News correspondent and said that if Oman gets in the way with our war in Iran, he would, and I quote, bomb the shit out of them. Bomb the shit out of them. That's the sitting president of the United States describing what he intends to do to a country that we are not at war with, a country we have been at peace with since John Adams was alive, a country that has spent the last 2 years carrying a message between Washington and Tehran and from Tehran to Washington because both sides trusted them enough to let them do it. He threatened to bomb the shit out of the mailman. In Oman's entire offense, the whole crime that he's willing to bomb them over was that they sat down with the Iranians to work out who gets to sail through a strip of water that its own coastline forms one side of. Bomb the shit out of them. Not sanction them, not summon their ambassador, not take it to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, not ask Congress of the United States for a declaration of war the way the Constitution requires, in language that's so plain that a 5th grader can read it and understand it. He threatened to bomb them. And now I'm going to be straight with you about that quote because this program, we don't launder rumors, and I'm not going to start tonight. It came off of a phone interview. The correspondent has not released the audio, but the White House has not denied the accusation. And that same afternoon in the Oval Office, on camera, on the record, the president was asked whether he'd run out of patience with the Omanis, and he said that he didn't think that they'd behaved very well and that we'd handle them easily.
This morning you said you would bomb the ass out of Oman if they got in the way of reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Would you say you're out of patience with Oman as strategic?
No, I don't think they behave very well, but we'd handle them very easily, just like we do other things.
So the threat is real. The profanity is secondhand. It's not really the important part. And I'm going to tell you which is which because later in this episode, I'm going to ask you to trust me on something that's much harder than this. So here's where that leaves us tonight. There's a kid in Phoenix right now, 22 years old. He drills 1 weekend a month. He works in a warehouse in Tempe, and he has a supervisor who gets annoyed every time he has to leave to perform his National Guard duty or his annual training. He belongs to the militia of Arizona, the National Guard. And that National Guard unit, that militia, is formally partnered with a country that his commander-in-chief just threatened to blow off the map. Nobody asked him. Nobody asked his mom. Nobody asked his state representative. Nobody asked the United States Senate. Nobody asked you. A community college professor signed him over, committed his life to a Middle Eastern sultan. I'm Dan McKnight, and this is the Bring Our Troops Home podcast tonight. There are 2 problems sitting in that same country at the same time. One man in Washington who believes that he can bomb any nation on earth because he woke up and decided to, and one appointed official in Phoenix who could bind a sovereign state, Arizona, to a foreign army because nobody ever told her that she couldn't. Neither one of those things, those actions, the threat of a bomb or the signing of a contract or a treaty, not one of them had a vote. Not one. Not from Congress, not from the Arizona legislature, not from you. I want you to watch for something as we go through this because it's the most disturbing part of the entire story. At no point tonight does anybody in this story break a single law. So we've got two problems, but I'm going to give you one solution. And I promise you that solution is not in Washington, D.C.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Welcome back to the Bring Our Troops Home podcast. We've been off for several weeks as we enjoyed our summer vacation, but we're back into the swing of things, and I promise you this episode will not disappoint. So back to the opening. Let's take the first problem that I described because it's the one that most of us already feel in our gut. And let me give you a little bit of background. On February 28th of this year at 1:15 in the morning, the United States commenced Operation Epic Fury against the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I'm going to read you the Department of War's own words off their own website because I could not improve them if I tried. Quote, "This operation is commenced under the direction and direct orders of the President of the United States." You heard me? The direct order of the President of the United States, not pursuant to a declaration of war because there isn't one, not pursuant to an authorization of use of military force because there isn't one of those either. It's the direct orders of one man. It's the doctrine, and it has a name in the law schools. It's called unitary executive theory. Stripped out of the Latin, it says this: the president is the whole of the executive branch. The commander-in-chief clause is a grant of power rather than a job description. And when he judges that American interests require force, he may use force, and the rest of us find out afterwards. You've heard the softer version your whole life. The president has inherent authority. The president must be able to act with speed and secrecy. The president cannot be handcuffed in a dangerous world by Congress. And then go look at the same Department of War page that I just talked about, and you'll find the magic words. Our forces are striking targets, prioritizing locations that pose an imminent threat. Imminent threat. That's the word they're using. That's it. That's their escape hatch. It's the one exception to the executive branch has carved out of Article 1 over 80 years. And when there's no time to run it to Congress, the commander-in-chief may act on his own. And every president since Truman has driven a truck through that tiny little hole. This is not a Republican problem. It's definitely not a Democrat problem. Truman in Korea, Johnson and Nixon in Vietnam and Cambodia, Reagan in Grenada, Clinton in Kosovo, Obama in Libya, Biden in Syria and Yemen, Trump in Iran. And 6 months into this war, that truck is still going. Now, some people will tell you that Congress has been silent, but Congress has not been silent. Congress has voted on this war. On March 5th of this year, the House of Representatives voted on a resolution directing the president to remove American forces from unauthorized hostilities in Iran. It failed 212 to 219. But then on June 3rd, the House passed the same or similar resolution, and it passed 215 to 208. On June 23rd, the Senate passed the same resolution, 50 to 48. And that was the first time in this entire war that both chambers of the United States Congress told the president to stop. The very next day, the Senate turned around and reversed itself on a separate resolution. On July 23rd, the House passed another one, 214 to 208. But the war continued every single day without interruption. The executive branch, the president and his staff, essentially thumbed their nose at Congress and said, "You're not important anymore. You're irrelevant." Because the concurrent resolution is not self-executing, because this administration questions whether the War Powers Resolution that it was passed under is even constitutional, but they claim the same War Powers Resolution as their authority to wage the war in Iran without an authorization. Very strange. But because a veto pen beats a piece of paper every day of the week and twice on Sunday, the war continues. So I want you to understand exactly where we are. The elected representatives of the people, they voted more than once to end the war that they never authorized in the first place, and the war did not end. Not for an hour, not for a minute, not for a second, not at all. That is the unitary executive theory in operation, not in a law review article, but in the sky over Iran. Now, that same doctrine has swung around and gone looking for a new target. And here's why it's picked Oman. If you pull up a map, and we'll put one up here, the Strait of Hormuz is the neck of the Persian Gulf, and roughly a fifth of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas moves through it. And Iran sits on the north side, and Oman sits on the south side. This isn't some sort of Romeo and Juliet metaphor. It's just geography. So when the shooting started and the strait began to close, the commercial shipping shifted to alternate channels. And that channel hugs the Omani coast, which means that Oman stopped being a bystander and became a door. And on Monday, the 60-day memorandum, the ceasefire that never really was a ceasefire between the United States and Iran, it expired with no future deal. And Iran's foreign ministry announced that it had reached an understanding with Oman on a transit map for the strait, meaning that commercial traffic could reopen in Oman and in Iran were the key signatories to it. So from where the president sits, Oman just stepped off the referee's stand or the mailman's delivery route, and they put on a jersey. And in the president's mind, the jersey they put on was Iran's. So that's what Monday's threat is all about, just so everybody understands exactly what it is. And that was not the first one either. In May, in a cabinet meeting, he said that Oman would behave like everybody else or we'd have to blow them up.
Oman will behave just like everybody else, so we'll have to blow them up. They understand that.
Last Friday, he floated making the Strait of Hormuz a territory of the United States, seizing independent waters. Monday, he told the Iranians to put up the white flag of surrender. Now, Professor Robert Pape at the University of Chicago, he has a name for the machine that we are watching run right now. He calls it the escalation trap. The structure, it's old and it's simple. You strike, and the strike works tactically, but it doesn't produce a political surrender. And then you strike again, believing that the next round finally delivers what the last one didn't. And every round destroys more and accomplishes less. Pape's line on Hormuz is that Iran is choking the strait, forcing a brutal choice: escalate or surrender control. And a trap that runs long enough stops distinguishing between an enemy and a neighbor. And that's how a country that we have never fought in 230 years ends up on a target list of President Trump on a Monday afternoon. That's problem one. Now let me take you to problem two, because it's been sitting in a filing cabinet in Phoenix for 3 years and almost nobody in Arizona or the United States even knows that it exists. Now, earlier I told you I'd prove everything tonight with photos, and here's one I want to show you right now. Look at this picture. Look at this photograph. I want you to look at it for just a second before I say anything about it. What you see here on the table are two people. Two nations' flags on the table in front of them. They both have pens in their hand and they're both signing the same document. That is the moment. That is the actual instant the state of Arizona was signed over, and it's a photograph that the National Guard Bureau published on its own website because they were proud of it. On the left, signing for Arizona, is Major General Kerry Muehlenbeck. She's the Adjutant General of Arizona, Director of the Department of Emergency and Military Affairs. She has 8,300 Arizona souls that are under her authority. And across the table, signing for the Sultanate of Oman, is Vice Admiral Abdullah bin Kamiz al-Razi. He's the Chief of Staff for the Sultan's armed forces. And I understand that the uniforms in this picture make this sound like soldiers' business. So let's look at what's underneath the uniform. Kerry Muehlenbeck, she had a direct commission in 1992 as a lawyer. She spent 4 years on active duty in the Air Force as the Assistant Staff Judge Advocate at Davis-Monthan. She separated from the military in 1997. She went back to Arizona and she joined the Arizona National Guard as a lawyer, a wing judge advocate, then a headquarters judge advocate, then a state judge advocate for the department, then deputy adjutant general, and then the top job as adjutant general. So go down that entire career line by line and find me a rifle company. Find me a squadron on a combat rotation. Find me one single entry that says this officer commanded American troops in a war, in a combat, in a conflict, in a disaster, in an emergency, anything. It's not there. It's never been there. 3 decades in uniform, not one day commanding Americans under fire or under immense pressure and stress. And when she stepped down in June of 2025 from that adjutant general's position, the governor's own press office told us where she went. She went back to her civilian job as a professor at Mesa Community College, a position that she'd been at for years, but she'd been on sabbatical for military leave for the 4 years she served as the adjutant general. She didn't retire to a ranch in Prescott. She went back to the faculty lounge. This woman is pure academic. And that is the person that the state of Arizona sent to a foreign capital to bind its own militia, its own National Guard, to another foreign army. A professor on sabbatical with a law degree and a rank who never led men in combat and who nonetheless held the signatory authority somehow to commit your children to a military obligation with the nation the President of the United States is now threatening to bomb the shit out of. So let's look at what she actually signed, because I want to slow down just a little bit because I glossed over something, and it's maybe one of the most important objects of this entire story. What's the thing on the table? This wasn't a handshake, wasn't a photo op. It's not a proclamation or a ceremonial key to a city. The National Guard Bureau's own words for this partnership is a decree. And when California signed theirs with Mexico's Secretariat of National Defense last October, the Guard Bureau described it as an official document formalizing the agreement to authorize signatories from two different nations, two different governments, a formal instrument. Arizona enrolls the Arizona National Guard as an institution, not as a unit, not as a rotation, not as a short-term deployment, but the entire Arizona National Guard itself into a standing military relationship with the armed forces of the Sultanate of Oman under the Department of War's State Partnership Program. And here's what that relationship obligates, according to the Guard Bureau's own release announcing it. Exercises, co-deployments, key leader engagements in the United States and in Oman. Listen to those words again. Exercises, co-deployments, key leader engagements. Co-deployments means that the Arizona Guardsmen and the Omani forces going to the same place at the same time, doing the same job. Key leader engagements means that Omani generals and officers are in Phoenix and Arizona general officers are in Muscat, and they're on a recurring basis. They're there indefinitely. They go back over and over again and build relationships. The Arizona State Partnership Program coordinator, Colonel Pete Caffrey, he said it plainly. The partnership would offer a new perspective in working, deploying, training, and learning together. Deploying together. And the Omani Vice Admiral who signed the other half of it said it in even plainer English. He called it the culmination of both countries' leaderships enhancing the strategic partnership. He said it reaffirmed the importance of strengthening joint military and security efforts. He said it paved the way for further cooperation in the field of joint defense and security. Joint defense. This isn't a sister city program. It's not a cultural exchange. We're talking about joint defense. There is no sunset clause on it either. These things don't expire. Arizona's partnership with Kazakhstan, another similar agreement, was signed in 1993. And it's 33 years old and it's still running. There's no renewal vote. There's no reauthorization. There's no 5-year review by anybody that the people of Arizona ever elected. It was signed once in a palace and it runs until somebody decides otherwise. Now, let me tell you the part that took me 2 days to accept, and I still haven't quite accepted it. But I can't show you the document that they signed. I've looked. I can't find it. It's not published on the National Guard Bureau's website. It's not on the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs website. It's not in the Congressional Record. It's not in the Federal Register. It's not in any public treaty registry because it's technically not a treaty. Remember? That's what they tell us. Because they said it's not. So it doesn't go into the place where treaties would go. But the Government Accountability Office audited this program in 2022. It reviewed the guidance and the documentation, and it published none of the agreements. I wonder why. I want you to understand that this is a choice and not some sort of limitation. The United States Department of State publishes agreements like this all the time. In March, they published the full text of the Strategic Partnership Agreement with the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's on state.gov right now. Anybody can read it. You can look it up. Security and Defense Cooperation, Joint Steering Committee, the whole thing, published for the world to see. So the government knows how to publish a strategic partnership agreement with a foreign government. It does it all the time. But for some reason, it just didn't publish this one, which means that the citizens of Arizona can see the photograph of the signing. They don't get to see the thing that's signed. I'm going to be honest about the limits of what I'm alleging because precision is the only weapon that we have. They can't take away from us. This is not a mutual defense treaty, according to the experts. There's no clause in it obligating Oman to defend Arizona. Anybody who tells you otherwise is handing the other side a free win. But a document that commits American guardsmen to co-deploy with a foreign army indefinitely, with no expiration and no review, signed by an appointed officer in a foreign capital, and is never shown to the legislature of the state that it binds or to the Senate of the United States of America. That's not nothing, folks. I'm going to call it what it is. It's a de facto treaty. Two governments, two flags, two signatures, a ceremony, a decree, a photograph for the press, obligations real enough that two militaries plan around them, they budget around them, and would send people to die over them if it ever came to that. It does literally everything that a treaty does, but it's missing exactly one thing. Think back to your 5th grade civics class. What's it missing, folks? A 2/3 vote by the United States Senate that Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution requires for all treaty ratification. But now, you can't even read it to find out what the hell it actually says. We have to take their word for it. And that missing thing is kind of the point of this whole argument. Now, before anybody accuses me of building an hour-long podcast episode out of one photograph, let me back up and show you what this episode actually is, because Arizona and Oman is not the exception. It is the program working exactly as it was designed. And I want to start with what it looks like on an ordinary Tuesday, because I don't want you picturing something sinister, because mostly it isn't. It kind of is. It looks like 8 Arizona guardsmen getting off a plane in Muscat with a slide deck. A week of medical training with Omani corpsmen. A joint exercise where both sides practice loading casualties onto the same aircraft. A colonel from Phoenix sitting down with a colonel from the Sultan's Armed Forces to talk about maintenance schedules. An Omani officer flying to Tucson to spend 2 weeks watching how American Air Wings run its operations desk. Some general's wife makes dinner for another general and his wife. There's photographs, there's handshakes, there's challenge coins, and everybody means it when they say they're friends and they're good partners. It's what a state partnership program does on a normal day. Now, there's escalations, there's big training exercises, joint operations, and things like that, but that's not a plot. It's mostly earnest people doing useful work. That's exactly why nobody ever looks at the damn thing. And exactly how a signature in a palace becomes a standing military relationship that no legislature, no Congress, no elected person ever voted on. So here's the authority of how it was created. Title 10 of the United States Code, Section 341. It's short, and I'm going to read you the operative language. It says, the Secretary of Defense, with the concurrence of the Secretary of State, is authorized to establish a program of activities to support the security cooperation objectives of the United States between members of the National Guard of a state and the military forces of a foreign country. I'm going to read that one more time because it says it right there in the descriptive words, the operative words of Section 341, to support the security cooperation. Security cooperation. That's the whole approval chain. The Secretary of Defense, with the concurrence of the Secretary of State, 2 executive branch officers, 2 presidential appointees, neither of them elected to anything ever by anybody. Congress gets a notification requirement on certain activities, and that's it. They get a 15-day notice. A notice. Not a vote, not a hearing, a notice. They get less of a notice than you give to a landlord before you move out. They don't even get the same courtesy that you give to a slumlord when you move up into a better place. Last June, a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense testified before the House Oversight Committee and gave them a number. That number was 115. There's 115 partner nations, all 50 states, every territory, the District of Columbia, all of it, and more than half of the countries on planet Earth are now paired with an American state militia in a de facto treaty. In 2024, the chief of the National Guard Bureau announced a new round: Finland, Palau, Sierra Leone, Saudi Arabia. Now, my own home state of Idaho has been married to the Royal Cambodian Armed Forces since 2009. The Idaho Military Division's own website says 6 to 9 trips a year, roughly 40 Idaho soldiers and airmen at a time, go to Cambodia. Now, I served in the Idaho Army National Guard and I never voted on Cambodia. I'm a citizen of the state of Idaho and I've never voted on Cambodia. Neither did you or anybody else. Neither did any member of the Idaho legislature. Neither did any member of the Idaho delegation to Congress. But now Arizona doubled up. They've been with Kazakhstan in a de facto treaty since 1993 and Oman since 2023. Montana, they carry 4 countries. And 115 de facto treaties exist. And not one of them, not one, has ever been ratified by 2/3 vote in the United States Senate. Now I'm going to make the opposition's argument for them, because if I don't, somebody will do it much worse than me in the comment section of this video. They're going to tell you that the program is cheap. Therefore, it's worthy. That it builds real relationships, that it gives young guardsmen international experience that they never otherwise get. That it produces disaster response training and medical exchanges and wildfire coordination and NATO integration into the Baltics that arguably kept peace for 30 years. All that might be true. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that every one of these is sinister. Most are exactly what the brochure the National Guard Bureau produces says. Here's the problem. The problem is that a program that runs entirely on a brochure has no accountability. And in 2022, the Government Accountability Office audited the program, the entire state partnership program. And in fiscal year 2021, the Guard had recorded 5% of the program activities as a complete in the tracking system. They weren't even documenting their own work in the program. You know why the military has never passed an audit? There's no accountability. 5%. GAO also found real confusion among the people running the program about which statutory authorities applied to which activities. The operators, they couldn't consistently tell you what law they were looking under or working under. 115 foreign militaries, 50 state militias, 2 cabinet signatures, a 15-day notice to the United States Congress, and the government's own auditors cannot reliably tell you what the program did last year or any year or ever. That's not an oversight. That's not accountability. That's an honor system with a flag on it, with trinkets on their collars and ribbons on the chest. So now go back into that room in Muscat with me, because there's somebody in it that I haven't told you about yet. Now, I keep telling you that I'm going to show you photos of proof of everything I'm saying, and I'll do that right here. There was somebody in that room that should have been there, but she's not in the picture that I showed you before. But in that room was the governor of Arizona. She was there that day, not at the table. She was in the building. Governor Katie Hobbs, she flew from Phoenix to Muscat, Oman for that ceremony. She left on Friday, landed on Saturday. The ceremony was on Monday. She brought her chief of staff and a policy advisor. It was their second foreign trip of her governorship, and she'd been in office for about 9 weeks. Think about that for a second. Governor of a sovereign United State. 2 foreign policy trips outside the country in the first 2 months. She crossed 8,000 miles and 11 time zones to be in that room. And she didn't sign the document. She stood there and watched as a community college professor, a member of her cabinet, signed it for her. Now, I want you to read, and I'm going to put it up on the screen, what her own press office put out afterwards. This is still on the Arizona governor's website. You can look it up for yourself. I promise it's there. It says, quote, as the governor and commander-in-chief of the Arizona National Guard, Governor Hobbs participated in a formal signing ceremony of this partnership in Muscat, Oman. Commander-in-chief of the Arizona National Guard. She used the title. She put the constitutional office in the sentence, in the press release. She reached for that authority. Then said that she participated in. Not signed the document, not executed it, not committed the state of Arizona to it, but that she participated in it. That's a woman who wanted every ounce of the credit and not 1 ounce of the signature. She wanted the title in the press release and somebody else's name on the document. What did she do with the rest of the trip? I'm going to read this from her own office again. She met with Secretary General of Oman's Ministry of Defense. She met with the American ambassador. She went to ministerial meetings on Tuesday. She toured a mosque. She toured a museum. She went to the American International School in Muscat and took questions from 8th graders. Cultural touring. That's the phrase her office used, cultural touring. She went as a tourist. She flew 8,000 miles to a foreign capital, invoked her constitutional authority as the commander-in-chief of the state militia in a press release, watched an appointee, a community college professor, sign that militia that she's the commander-in-chief of over to a foreign army, and then went to a goddamn museum. I want to be fair to her on one point before I take the rest of it away. This wasn't her deal. She didn't come up with this deal in 9 weeks. She doesn't have that level of competency. The Oman partnership was actually announced in October of 2022 under Republican Governor Doug Ducey, before Katie Hobbs was ever sworn in. She did inherit it. Nobody handed her a choice about whether it existed. But that's not actually true. She did have a choice. She had all kinds of choices. She could have stayed home. She could have said to the Arizona legislature, before I put the prestige of this office behind a military arrangement with a Persian Gulf Sultanate, the elected representatives of the people of this state are going to hold one hearing on it. One. She could have picked up the pen herself and owned it like a commander-in-chief. She could have asked one question, just one. What happens to Arizona guardsmen if the United States and Oman ever end up on opposite sides of a conflict? Instead, she got on a plane, stood beside a general, invoked her authority in the press release, and went to a museum and came home and did it all wearing a head covering scarf like a good girl. This is the part I can't get past. She was a tourist, and she's still a tourist. She occupies that Capitol building in Phoenix the same way that she occupied that room in Muscat. Present for the photograph, absent for the decision, a tourist inside of her own government. Because the truth that this episode exists to tell you is that the governor of Arizona has almost no power over the Arizona National Guard, and she has never once tried to reclaim any of it that is hers by the authority of the position that she was elected to hold. Let me close the loop because I want this to be party proof. Doug Ducey, a Republican, appointed that general, that community college professor, Kerry Muehlenbeck, adjutant general, in April of 2021. And then he put a second star on her collar just a few moments later. Katie Hobbs, a Democrat, kept her and called her a valued member of the cabinet. Ducey, he teed up Oman, and Hobbs' administration signed it right into existence. Now I want you to flip the governor's race, flip it in either direction in any year you like. And you get the exact same signature on the exact same document in the exact same palace. The machine, it didn't care who won that election. The machine had a partnership in the queue, and that machine executed it. And two governors of two different parties stood there and held the machine's coat. So I want to issue a direct challenge. And I want to talk to the man who wants the job next. Congressman Andy Biggs, you won your primary in July. In November, the people of Arizona will decide whether you replace Katie Hobbs. Frankly, I hope you do. And I'm going to ask you 4 questions on this program tonight in public, and I'd like an answer to all 4 before Election Day. Before I ask them, I'm going to say the thing out loud that everybody watching already knows, because I'm not going to insult you by pretending that I don't know your record. On March 5th of this year, you voted against a resolution directing the president to remove American forces from unauthorized hostilities in Iran. You put out a statement saying his actions fall squarely within his Article 2 authority as commander-in-chief. But, Andy, 6 years earlier in 2020, you crossed your own party and voted the other way to require this same president to come to Congress, to you, before going to war with Iran. You were the same congressman, it was the same country, and you provided an opposite answer. Now, I'm not here to burn you to the ground on that. I'm here because in about 10 weeks, you may hopefully become the commander-in-chief of the Arizona National Guard, and Arizona's guardsmen deserve to know which Andy Biggs is taking that oath. So, 4 questions for you, sir. 1, where do you stand on the sons and daughters of Arizona being committed to a military arrangement with a nation the President of the United States is currently threatening to bomb the shit out of? Not a nation we're at war with, not a nation that attacked us, not a nation that you authorized a war in Congress for, a nation that Arizona has signed an unexpired, unpublished de facto treaty with, and a nation the commander-in-chief said on Monday that he would bomb if they got in the way. Question 2, will you refer this to your own state government? Will you ask the Arizona House and the Arizona Senate to hold one public hearing on the validity and the purpose of this state partnership agreement? What's in it? What it obligates? Who approved it? And why the elected representatives of this state have never seen the document. One hearing. That's the whole ask. The legislature you'd be working with every day of your governorship. Put it in their court. Question number 3. Will you exercise the authority of the Arizona Constitution that it gives you as the commander-in-chief of the Arizona National Guard and ensure that the resources of that guard and the lives inside of it are committed to the preservation and the safety and the defense of Arizona and her citizens? Not the security and the border between Oman and Yemen. Arizona has its own border, all its own. And Congressman, you've built an entire career on that fact alone. Finally, question 4, will you sign the Defend the Guard Act when it passes? Because the Arizona Senate has already passed it 3 times. It was the first legislative chamber in the country to do it. It has died in the House every single time, but that's going to change. If that bill reaches your desk in 2027, do you sign it, or do you do what governors of both parties have done in the states for 4 years running, which is nothing at all? Congressman Biggs, if the people of Arizona choose you in November, will you be Arizona first? Will you stand between your own militia, the militia that you command, and the arbitrary power of the federal government? Because Doug Ducey didn't do it when he was governor, and Katie Hobbs flew to Muscat and watched somebody else sign away your autonomy and your sovereignty. 2 governors, 2 parties, same result. And you're asking to be the 3rd governor in this chain. So the invitation's open. Congressman Biggs, come on this program with me. Answer these questions on camera. I'll give you all the time and all the latitude you need. I won't interrupt and I won't debate you. I'll let you get your position on the record. And then I'll share it with all the veterans and all the people that follow our show and the Defend the Guard effort. Now, one thing that's good for Andy Biggs, if he does become the governor, is that community college professor, she left her office. She retired in June of 2025. And the bad news is that Katie Hobbs picked a replacement, and she did the thing that is unforgivable. She picked another damn lawyer. No offense to any lawyers who may watch this show. I hope there aren't many, but lawyers tend to not be our favorite people in the world because they lawyer the shit out of things. But calling her replacement a lawyer might be underselling this thing, so let me be as specific as I can. Brigadier General John Conley's civilian practice, that's the successor. That's who was appointed adjutant general. His civilian practice is in commercial litigation and employment law. He's the partner at a Phoenix firm. And I think you heard me right, employment law. And you know what that means in plain English, right? A fucking HR attorney. The commanding general of the Arizona National Guard, 8,300 souls, 8,300 citizen soldiers in Arizona who are in fighter wings and tankers, they're Green Berets. Their commanding general is a human resources lawyer. You can't make this up. And if you've ever worked anywhere that had an HR department, you already understand this man's professional worldview because you've lived underneath it. HR does not exist to protect you, soldiers, citizen soldiers in Arizona. HR exists to protect the institution from you. HR is what happens when an organization decides that it would rather host a permanent internal government bureaucracy inside of its own building than trust the people who work there. HR is the compliance officer to make sure you don't wear shorts to work on Friday. And they stand between a man and his livelihood. They generate documentation, they manage exposure, and they find language that makes it a decision defensible after somebody else has already made it. That's his career. It's a way of thinking. And we made him a general officer and then handed him the entire state militia. I'm not going to walk you through his file the way I did with Kerry Muehlenbeck's. I'm just going to read you the jobs that he's held. Legal assistance attorney, trial counsel again, labor counselor, and I promise you I did not invent that title. Legal support team, senior legal advisor, staff judge advocate, state judge advocate, director of administrative services, which is personnel and finance. 9 military jobs, and every one of them at a desk. More than 30 years in uniform, and the closest this man ever got to war was a courtroom in Germany. He's a labor counselor in the United States Army. That is HR in a uniform. That's a bad combination. And I won't ask you to take the combat part from me. Take it from Arizona State Senator Wendy Rogers. She's a Republican with 20 years in the United States Air Force. At his confirmation hearing this past May, she said it flatly.
We have men and women being fired upon. We have significant percentage of our military assets overseas in danger. And so if you're asked to support that operation, you are the commanding general of a potent combat force, but you've never led at any level in combat up till now. But we've turned a corner in our U.S. geopolitical situation right now, and we are at war. And you would be asked to command forces that would be at war. Yet you've never led or experienced hostile fire in and of your own right. And so this is not a personal situation. This is an experience identifier that I'm speaking to.
John Conley has no combat experience. He has never actually commanded any troops anywhere. Listen to me. He's never commanded troops anywhere. And he runs the entire Arizona National Guard. Now, up to this point, I've been very careful. The system is the villain. I don't know these people personally and so on. But I'm finished being careful with this one, with John Conley, because unlike the professor, the community college professor, this man has a record on our bill. February 17th of 2025, Arizona Senate Committee on Military Affairs and Border Security, Senate Bill 1495, the Defend the Guard Act. Senator Wendy Rogers was the sponsor. It was her bill. John Conley, then the director of administrative services, not even an adjutant general yet, he showed up to testify against the bill. And I'm going to play his testimony for you, and I want you to listen to how he opened. He didn't offer an argument. He read a roster.
General, for the previous 2 sessions, your office has voiced concerns over federal funding. In the past 2 years, have you discussed this legislation with the National Guard Bureau in Washington?
General. Mr. Chair, Senator Rogers, the National Guard Bureau is against it. The National Guard Association of the United States is against it. All 54 commanding generals of the 54 states and territories against it. The Enlisted Association of the National Guard of America is against it.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator.
General, yes or no?
Mr. Chair,
General.
Senator Rogers, yes.
You heard him. The National Guard Bureau is against it. The National Guard Association of the United States is against it. All 54 commanding generals of the 54 states and territories are against it. The Enlisted Association of the National Guard of America is against it. That was his entire case. Everybody important disagrees with you, Senator. Thing is, that's not a constitutional argument. That was a seating chart and a roll call. So Senator Rogers, being the fierce warrior that she is, she asked the obvious question.
General, what are the names, titles, and ranks of the officials you spoke to who informed you that they would support defunding the National Guard in response to this bill?
General.
Mr. Chair, Senator, with respect to the individuals in the National Guard Bureau, I have not spoken with the Chief of the National Guard Bureau about it.
Give me the names. Give me their titles. Give me their ranks. Who exactly told you that they didn't support Defend the Guard and that they would support defunding the Arizona National Guard if we pass this bill? And guess what old John Connolly, the HR lawyer, said? Nothing. He couldn't produce a single name. Not one. Not a general, not a colonel, not a staffer, not a private, not a phone number. What he had just told the committee of the Arizona State Senate was that 54 commanding generals opposed the bill, and when a 20-year Air Force veteran asked him who he had actually spoken to, the room got really quiet. Then she took the funding threat that he had presented away from him entirely. She cited the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 that Congress gets to appropriate and the executive may not withhold what Congress has appropriated, meaning that nobody could take the funds away because they've already been doled out by Congress. It's already been voted on. She asked him directly whether defunding the Arizona National Guard could be done by the Department of Defense or the National Guard Bureau, or would it require an act of Congress?
Congress is the body which appropriates the budget, including funding for each state's National Guard. In addition, there are multiple laws. We talk about the law, you and I, such as the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, which provide legal reinforcement by prohibiting the executive from withholding appropriations designated by Congress. Do you agree? Here is my question. Do you agree that an action as drastic and politically controversial as defunding the Arizona National Guard would require an act of Congress?
General.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes.
He relented and said, yes, it would require Congress. He conceded the fact, the whole threat, the one that he and all of his ilk use in every hearing across the country. The whole threat in every session, the one that kills our bill over and over and over. It killed it in Idaho, and he gave it up under questioning inside of 15 minutes. He then told the committee that the bill's language about the instrumentality of war would prevent 8,000 Arizona Guardsmen from doing routine training. Rogers called him out. She said, "You're being disingenuous," to his face, and said it undermined his credibility. And then came the moment that should have ended his nomination and his military career. Rogers asked him a simple question. Explain, Mr. Attorney, the legal authority for the United States war in Syria.
Could you explain the legal authority underpinning the United States war in Syria for the past decade? A conflict which has included the deployment of thousands of National Guardsmen into conflict. There's been no declaration of war. 2001 AUMF does not apply to Syria, and no invocation of the War Powers Act.
Yes, Mr.
Yes,
Chair.
General.
Senator. With respect to the constitutional underpinning, the preamble to the Constitution says that Congress will provide for the common defense. Article 1 of the Constitution says that Congress shall provide for the common defense.
There's no declaration. The 2001 authorization of use of military force doesn't reach Syria. So what is the legal basis? And the senior legal officer and the highest commanding general of the Arizona National Guard, and presumably one of the foremost HR attorneys in the entire military, the lawyer, the judge advocate, the 30 years of legal training, he answered by citing Congress's power to provide for the common defense and to raise an army. He argued that the power extends to authorizing overseas military operations. But there isn't one. Congress never authorized Syria. So I want you to stop right there and I want you to open your own Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, that Congress shall have power to declare war. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12, to raise and support armies. Two clauses numbered separately because they are separate powers. The founders divided the power to build a military from the power to use one deliberately, because a nation that confuses the two has already lost the argument. Raising an army is not declaring a war. Funding a force is not authorizing its employment. If appropriating money were the same as declaring war, then Congress declared war on the entire planet the day it passed the last defense budget. And Clause 11 is nothing more than a decorative sentence. So the lawyer, the HR lawyer, he got it backwards. Under oath, in a hearing on a constitutional bill, as the state's senior military lawyer, vying for the position of adjutant general. That is not a difference of opinion between reasonable men. That is a man who does not understand the document he swore an oath to, testifying against a bill written to enforce it. He did it in 2024 too, on a previous version of the bill. That year, he told the committee the federal government had full authority over the Guard because it owns the lion's share of the equipment and the salaries.
And the federal government doesn't own us. The federal government owns the equipment that they give us, and the federal government pays a great lion's share of our salaries, so that we will train to fight alongside the active component if the president asks us to do so. So they don't own us. At rest, the governor is still our commander-in-chief. At rest, the governor can still use us. If we say that we're not going to be part of that team that you and Senator Borelli were on, and I used to be active duty as well. If we say that we're not going to be part of that team, then the federal government really has no reason to give us the money.
Whoever bought the trucks owns the men. That is a property theory of the American militia. Run it against Clause 16 of the Constitution, which reserves to the states the appointment of officers and the authority of training the militia in writing in the text, and that entire argument collapses instantly. But a 10-year-old can see what's wrong with it without opening the Constitution at all. That's HR right there. That is precisely what HR sounds like. Never a straight answer, never a name, always a process, always a caveat, always language engineered so that whatever happens next, the institution is covered. But here's where he beat himself. I don't believe he even realizes what he did. In that same testimony, arguing for unlimited deployment authority, John Conley, the HR attorney, told the Arizona Senate where Arizona's guardsmen already were.
Right now, Secretary Hegseth has Arizona National Guard in the Sinai Peninsula, trying to keep peace between Israel and Egypt and others in that region. Right now, Secretary Hegseth has National Guard members fighting ISIS in the Middle East. The National Guard was heavily involved in dropping the bombs on the Houthis that finally stopped them from bombing Israel and bombing our ships in the Navy. So
he said the Arizona National Guard is in the Sinai Peninsula between Israel and Egypt. He said the National Guard members are fighting ISIS in the Middle East. He said the Guard was heavily involved in dropping bombs on the Houthis. He said all of that out loud on the record as an argument for why the elected representatives of the people of Arizona should not be permitted a say in any of it. So when I ask you right now whether Arizona Guardsmen could end up inside of a shooting war involving Oman, a nation that Arizona has a de facto military treaty with, a nation that the president has threatened to bomb the shit out of as recently as Monday, I'm not speculating about something that's completely far off. Arizona's own general already told you that they're over there. He just told you it was none of your damn business. All right, so there they are, both problems on one table. On one side is an executive branch that can bind a state's militia to a foreign army with 2 cabinet signatures and a community college adjutant general's pen, and a governor who issues a press statement. On the other side is an executive branch that can order that same militia into a shooting war on one man's direct orders, with Congress voting no 3 separate times, but nothing happens. Now, the question that made me want to make this episode: if the president orders strikes on Oman, whose National Guardsmen are going to carry out that order? Because there is no legal reason on God's earth that it wouldn't be Arizona. There is no clause anywhere exempting a state's guardsmen from operations against their own partner nation. The state partnership program does not create that protection. Section 341 does not create it. The militia clauses were supposed to create that type of protection, and they've been read down to nothing more than decoration. So let's run it all the way out. Arizona Guardsmen train Omani officers in Muscat. Arizona hosts Omani general officers at Goldwater and Morris Air National Guard Base in Tucson. Arizona Airmen and Omani Airmen learn each other's call signs. They know each other's names. They know each other's kids' names and birth dates, because that is the stated purpose of the program. And the Guard Bureau brags about it in every one of the press releases that it publishes. And then one morning, a man in Washington decides that Oman got in the way. And then the tankers that go up to refuel the strike packages are Arizona tankers, because the 161st Air Refueling Wing in Phoenix flies KC-135s, and this has been an air war, and air wars run on aviation fuel. Now, I'm going to be scrupulously honest with you here, because this program has one rule that outranks all others, and it's that we do not get ahead of the record. I can't tell you tonight that there are Arizona Guardsmen standing in Oman. There's no public confirmation of that, and I'm not going to manufacture one. I can't tell you that Arizona wings are flying in epic fury, although we believe they are. The Pentagon has not released a complete state-by-state list, and I'm not going to guess or speculate for you, but you can look up the hometown press releases from Arizona newspapers talking about this very thing. I'm not predicting that we're going to bomb Oman. I hope to God that we don't, but the president has said otherwise. But here's what I am telling you, that every legal door between here and there is standing wide open. Not one of them is locked. Not one of them has anybody in the breach. Not one of them requires a vote. The president can strike a sovereign nation without a declaration of war. We have watched him do it for 6 months in Iran over the recorded objection of both chambers of Congress. The National Guard Bureau can bind a state militia to that same nation without a Senate ratification. We've watched them do it 115 times. And that same president can federalize that militia and send it anywhere on the face of the earth, and the governor will find out about it in the news. You don't believe me about this? Let's just look at Tennessee. Ask the governor of Tennessee. He stood on the podium this spring and was asked how many Tennessee Guardsmen were deployed in epic fury and from which bases. And he said, I don't know. The commander-in-chief of the Tennessee National Guard did not know where his own guardsmen were, because the moment the president federalized them under Title 10, Section 12301, a governor's authority evaporates and he gets whatever scraps Washington chooses to feed him. That's not conspiracy theory, folks. Every link of that chain is on the .mil websites with a photograph attached and a press release right underneath it. So here's where we land right now. A community college professor signed a de facto treaty in Muscat, Oman. A man in Washington may bomb the shit out of it. And the people who would carry out that same strike are the same people that she, the community college professor, signed over. And not one of them, not one of us was ever asked. Now, I feel it's important to make their best argument for them and do it properly. There's a case. It's called Perpich v. Department of Defense. In the 1990s, the Supreme Court decided what's known as the Perpich issue in a case where Governor Perpich sued the Department of Defense. The governor of Minnesota, Governor Perpich, tried to block his National Guard from training in Honduras, and he lost at the Supreme Court unanimously. The court upheld what's called the Montgomery Amendment, that a governor may not withhold consent to federal active duty of his or her National Guard based on location, purpose, type, or schedule. It's a real case. It's on the books. And anybody who tells you that defend the guard is a slam dunk is lying to you, because it's going to take a bit of a fight. But here's the honest answer. Every legal scholar agrees that Perpich decision was about National Guard training overseas. Training, not active combat. The court was not presented with the question of what happens when Congress never authorized the war at all. That question has never been squarely answered. That's what we're here to try and answer. That's what Defend the Guard is about, because no state has ever actually forced the issue. No state has stood up and said no when the president wanted to take their National Guard and go fight in an undeclared and unauthorized war. And Defend the Guard, like I said, it forces the issue. They'll talk about the supremacy clause. They'll say that a state can't override federal law, and that's correct generally, but the Defend the Guard doesn't try to. And before we get to what it really does, let's actually read the clause that they're waving at us, because almost nobody cites the supremacy clause, has ever read past the first 11 words of it. Article 6, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. That's the supremacy clause. I want you to stop and listen to it. It's on the screen. I want you to keep reading it. 3 words. In pursuance of. That is not throat clearing. That is not decorative language the founders threw in there for rhythm. It's a condition. And it's doing the heaviest lifting of this entire sentence. Federal law is supreme when and only when it's made in pursuance of the Constitution, not when it's made in spite of it, not when it's made around it, in pursuance of it. So I want you to ask this question as plainly as you can. Is fighting a war that Congress has never declared and never authorized an act made in pursuance of the Constitution that assigns the power to declare war to Congress in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11? It can't be. Those are the same documents. A war conducted in defiance of Clause 11 is not in pursuance of the Constitution that contains Clause 11. It's the opposite of that. You cannot claim supremacy under a document by violating the provision of that document that you are claiming supremacy under. The order that sends the Arizona Guardsmen to a war Congress has never declared is not supreme law. It's an order. And it's an order is only as good as the authority that stands behind it. Not about a personality, a character, the person that won the election. It's about the authority behind the order. Now look at the other half of the same clause, because they never want you to do that either. All treaties made under the authority of the United States. Treaties are supreme law. Same sentence, equal footing with federal statutes. So what does it take to make a treaty? Well, the document, the Constitution, that old archaic dusty piece of paper, it says in Article 2, Section 2, that it takes 2/3 of the Senate to ratify a treaty. That means that a piece of paper that a community college professor signed in Muscat, Oman, gets no supremacy either. It's never been ratified. It's never been made under the authority of the United States in the same sense that Article 6 means. It is not supreme law. It is not law at all. So they can't have it both ways. They can't tell you that the document is too important for the Arizona legislature to review and simultaneously too informal to require the Senate ratification that would have made it supreme. Now, here's what our bill actually does, because I want to be honest about the ground that we are standing on, and it is firm ground. Defend the Guard runs through anti-commandeering. In a Supreme Court case, New York versus United States or Prince versus the United States, the federal government may pass its own laws and enforce them with its own officers. It may not conscript state officials to do the work for it. A governor is a state official. An adjutant general is a state officer. Clause 16 reserves the appointment of officers to the states. In the text, it's clear as day. It's in writing. Defend the Guard tells those state officers what they may and they may not do with the state's own militias when Congress has not authorized a thing. It does not nullify a federal law. It doesn't command a federal officer. It doesn't free a single guardsman from other lawful orders. It tells Arizona's officers that Arizona's militia is not available for a war that is not authorized and nobody declared. I'm going to say the most honest part about it out loud. Same as I did with the Perpich decision. No court has squarely ruled on this. The in pursuance argument has never been tested at the Supreme Court in the context of an undeclared war, because no state has ever had the balls to stand up and pass it and challenge it and force that test. It's not a weakness in the argument. It's an assignment. They say that they'll cut our funding for the National Guard. They said it in Idaho in 2024. They said it in Arizona in 2025. They've said it in every other state where we've had hearings and have had to testify in support of the Defend the Guard bill. But then in Arizona, the man saying it admitted under questioning that it's not really true because Congress controls the purse strings. So it's a threat. It's a paper threat. It's not an argument. Notice that they never litigate or testify or fight on the merits of the bill. They go straight to the checkbook. And that tells you which ground that they are standing on. And so they always say the same thing also. They're like, why don't you just fix this problem in Congress? And this is the honest objection, and it deserves an honest answer. And I wish we could. I wish we could fight it in Congress. But since we're in Arizona, let's look at Arizona. Let's look at their congressional delegation. I'm going to look at two specific examples. Two votes, 3 years apart. In March of 2023, under President Biden, the Syria War Powers Resolution came up for a vote. And it was under Biden, a Democratic president. Andy Biggs, congressman, voted yes for the War Powers Resolution. Eli Crane, congressman, voted yes. Congressman Paul Gosar voted yes. Congressman Schweikert voted yes. Democrat Ruben Gallego voted no. So all Republicans voted yes, all Democrats voted no. Democrats didn't want to limit Biden's authority. The Republicans wanted to constrict him. March of 2026, the Iran War Powers Resolution under a Republican president, President Trump. Biggs voted no, Crane voted no, Gosar voted no, Schweikert voted no, and every Arizona Democrat in the House voted yes. Not one member of the Arizona congressional delegation voted the same way twice on the same War Powers Resolution. 9 members, 2 votes, 0 consistency. The only variables that predicted if any of this was the party of the man in the White House. And I'm really sorry to say this, but we have to be honest. That includes Representative Paul Gosar. He's the first sitting member of the United States House to endorse Defend the Guard. He's a hero. He entered his support of Defend the Guard and his defense of the defunding argument into the congressional record in February of 2022. He's a man who published an op-ed in the Libertarian Institute telling the Arizona legislature to pass the bill so Arizona's Guard could never be deployed into an unconstitutional war. But he voted no against the War Powers Resolution. And I'm sure not here to burn Paul Gosar. Like I said, he's a hero in the movement. He did more for this movement than any other member of Congress ever. So I'm here to tell you what this all proves. It proves that a congressman vote follows the party of the president, and a state law does not do the same. It proves that the war party is not a party at all, but it's a building and it sits in Washington, D.C., and it doesn't matter who occupies it. And it proves that the fix can't live in a place where the answer changes every 4 years depending on who wins the presidential election. That's why we fight in the states. So I keep presenting the two problems, but now I'm going to give you the one solution. And I want to be as precise about what the solution actually is because it is not a single piece of paper or a piece of legislation or a protest or anything else. The solution is that we stop fighting the empire where the empire is the strongest and we start fighting it where it's the most vulnerable. Every problem in this episode lives in Washington, D.C. The unitary executive theory, it's in D.C. Section 341 that created the state partnership program, it's in Washington, D.C. The National Guard Bureau, NGA US, the Department of War, they all live in Washington, D.C. And every one of those 115 foreign defense ministries with a standing interest in an unconstrained American militia keeps an office in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, they've never lost. They're undefeated. They've never lost, not once on this issue. They have the lawyers, the lobbyists, the appropriations, the classified briefings, the 4-star witnesses, and the press corps that will print whatever slop they're asked to print. Remember when the press used to be the fourth estate and their job was to challenge everything that the government did? It doesn't exist anymore. You are not going to beat the empire on their own ground. 6 years in this fight, and I'm going to tell you this plainly, the anti-war movement has been getting slaughtered in Washington, D.C. my entire life. Because Washington is where the administrative state has home field advantage and a permanent majority. Every single one of those institutions has a soft flank, and it's the same soft flank, and almost nobody ever hits them there. But we do. because we recognize this. The empire needs the states. They need the 50 state militias, the National Guards that they don't own. They need state armories, state officers, state adjutant generals, and the enlisted contracts of the citizens who live in the counties and not in the District of Columbia. The empire is federal at the top and it's state at the bottom. And the bottom is where the people who actually do the work are. That's the solution. Attack the empire at the state level in 50 legislatures, in rooms where a farmer with a pickup truck can walk in and testify and be heard, and where a lobbyist from the National Guard Association is a stranger in the building with a lanyard around his neck instead of the most powerful man or lobbyist in the building. That's the one solution. Run 50 times on 50 fronts, 50 legislatures, 50 places where they have to win every single time, and we have to win once. Now, a strategy needs vehicles, and we have 2 of them, and they're traveling in tandem, side by side. Defend the Guard is the bill that we've been working on for years. It's a state bill. It says that the governor shall not release his state's National Guard or any member of it into active duty combat unless the United States Congress has passed an official declaration of war. Clean. That's the entire bill. And let me tell you everything that the bill does not do, because the people who fight this thing survive entirely on you not knowing, and it's important that we draw the difference. This doesn't touch hurricane response. It doesn't touch wildfire season. It doesn't touch flood rescue, search and rescue, ice storms, tornado recovery, or a single day of any state emergency mission at all. The flood evacuations that the Arizona Guard flew in 2022, untouched. Every one of those happens under the state authority at the governor's order, and this bill does not go anywhere near it. It doesn't touch the southern U.S. border. So let me say that one twice. Congressman Andy Biggs, you've made an entire career on being a border hawk. Defend the Guard does not touch the southern U.S. border. In Arizona, it's the first thing out of their mouths. Border missions are not combat. This bill defines combat. The border security isn't in the definition. Not one guardsman comes off that line. It doesn't touch the drug interdiction task force. It doesn't touch cyber defense units. It doesn't touch the counter drug program or civil support teams or the guys who show up when the water main takes out half the county. And here's the one thing they never mention because it collapses their entire argument. It doesn't stop foreign deployments. Not non-combat foreign deployments. Not one of them. It doesn't stop training missions overseas. It doesn't stop cross-training with partner nations. It doesn't stop exercises or key leader engagements. It doesn't stop a single subject matter exchange. It doesn't stop the state partnership program, unfortunately. I want to be very clear about that because I'd rather you hear it from me than from some general officer in a committee room. If Defend the Guard passed in Arizona tomorrow, the Oman partnership survives. The exchange continue. Arizona Guardsmen can still fly to Muscat. Omani officers can still come to Phoenix. Every bit of the relationship building in this program brags about in their brochures and in their press releases keeps right on happening. And I'm not asking any state to withdraw from anything. I'm not asking a governor to tear up a document. I'm not asking a single guardsman to skip a single exercise. There's exactly one thing that this bill stops. One, participating in a war that Congress has not declared. That's it. That's the entire scope of the legislation. Everything else in the Guard mission, every drill weekend, every deployment, every annual training that isn't combat, every partnership, disaster, every mile of the border continues exactly as it does today. So you have to ask yourself the question that matters. Who could possibly be against that? Who reads a bill and says, our sons and daughters don't go to war unless Congress of the United States declares one, and then shows up at the state capitol building to kill that bill? Well, I don't have to speculate for you. John Conley, the HR attorney, he answered that question himself on the record in a hearing room in Phoenix. He read the list into the transcript because he thought it was his strongest argument. I'm going to play the clip again. This is who opposes Defend the Guard.
Rogers, the National Guard Bureau is against it. The National Guard Association of the United States is against it. All 54 commanding generals of the 54 states and territories against it. The Enlisted Association of the National Guard of America is against it.
Now that's his list, not mine. His, General Conley's, the HR attorney. Now look at what that list actually is. Every single one of those is an institution inside of the apparatus. The National Guard Bureau is a federal agency. NGAUS is a lobbying organization that exists to represent that agency's interests in Washington, D.C. The 54 adjutant generals are appointed, not elected. the professor, and the HR lawyers from 49 other states. Now, not one voter is on that list, not one legislator, not one parent. Old Conley, he ran a whip count of the administrative state and called it a constitutional argument. And it goes wider than that because this program has a constituency that doesn't live here. I'm talking about the state partnership program. Its constituency and the lobbyists that support it has a constituency that aren't Americans. There's 115 foreign governments that are clients, that are partners of those lobbying organizations that have a partnership with an American state militia right now. 115 defense ministries with a standing institutional interest in the American National Guard remaining available, deployable, and unconstrained by any single state legislature anywhere. Every one of them benefits from an American military that will set its footprint down anywhere on earth, and every one of them benefits from a president who doesn't have to ask permission. Not one of them has any interest in the Arizona legislature discovering that they have a say. They just need to exercise it. Those nations, the 115 nations, they will never testify against the bill. They don't have to. They have the Guard Bureau, an NGA US, and 54 adjutant generals with trinkets on their chest and stars on their collar that will do it for them, being good boys and girls. And in 50 state capitals, in front of committees, using the same script every year. Money, money, money. That's the Uniparty. It isn't a slogan, and it isn't actually a party. It's a building and a lobbying arm and 115 foreign customers. And they are all against one sentence, that Congress declares a war before our kids fight in it. That's the sentence. That's the whole fight. Now, how does this solve both problems? Let's start with problem 2 first, because that's the easy one. Defend the Guard governs the exit. It stops your Guard from being sent into an unauthorized war. It says nothing about the entrance, not one word about state militia being signed over to a foreign army in the first place by an appointed officer in a foreign palace with the governor standing there watching like a tourist. So my first instinct was to add a section to the Defend the Guard bill, to bolt it on, fix both problems with one bill. But I tell you, after a few minutes of thinking about this, we recognize pretty quick that that's wrong. And the reason why it's wrong matters more than the fix. Defend the Guard is a one single issue. It's one page that you could read standing up in the hallway before you walk into a committee room. It's not a limitation. It's the reason why this bill has survived for 6 years being lied about in over 30 Capitol buildings. Every time a general walks into a committee room and says it would stop hurricane relief, we hold up a single page and we show them that it doesn't. You staple on a second issue onto it, you lose that. You hand them a new surface to attack. And you became the thing that we're fighting against in Washington, D.C. Because that's a Washington, D.C. trick. That's what the National Defense Authorization Act has become, an omnibus. That's how war authorizations end up buried on page 900 of a 5,000-page bill that includes pay raises for the troops so that every member can go home knowing that they just voted for some sort of unauthorized action and then claim that they support the troops because they voted for a pay raise. You see, we don't do that. We're not going to beat them by doing that. So we have a parallel bill. It's new. It would be filed alongside of Defend the Guard. Same sponsor. Voted on separately. Separate tracks, but traveling in tandem. We're calling it the Guard Sovereignty Act. And here's what it does. In one sentence, no officer of this state, not the governor, not the adjutant general, not the military department, may enter into, accept, renew, or materially expand this state's participation in the state partnership program under Section 341 without the prior approval of the legislature by joint resolution. So before that vote, the adjutant general has to tell the legislature 4 things in writing. Number 1, who the foreign partner is. Number 2, what the purpose and the scope of the partnership are. Number 3, what the commitments are expected of this state and its Guard. And number 4, what the thing does to Guard personnel, resources, readiness, and state missions. 4 questions in writing before the pen ever touches the paper. And there's a second section, and this one matters for Arizona tonight. Within 1 year, every existing partnership gets submitted to the legislature for review. Everyone, including Oman. Now, let me tell you what it Doesn't do, because I want the same discipline here that we demanded of the Defend the Guard bill. It does not cancel a partnership. It does not withdraw this state from anything. It does not tell the Secretary of Defense what he may or may not do. We're not claiming that kind of power. We don't need it. And it wouldn't survive in a courtroom anyway. It does not prevent a guardsman or a unit from entering a lawful federal service. It doesn't regulate one thing about guardsman once he's in federal service. It regulates state officers. That's all. What a state official may agree to in the name of the state before they sign. So there's two bills, but there's one strategy. There's two doors, and we're going to go through both of them. Defend the Guard is the way out. Congress declares the war before our kids fight in it. The Guard sovereignty is the way in. The people's representatives read the agreement before their kids are signed into it and committed to it. Each one stands alone. So when they come to kill one, they can't take the other down with it. They travel in tandem and they fall separately, which means that they have to beat us twice in every state and every session forever. They will not do that 50 times. And I'll tell you exactly what will happen when the second bill gets filed, because I've watched this movie in enough states that I can predict the ending. Nobody will argue against it on the merits. Nobody's going to stand up in a state capitol and say that the legislature should not be allowed to read a military agreement that binds the state's own militia. You can't say that sentence out loud with a straight face. So they're going to say this. It's unnecessary. It's redundant. The Guard Bureau already coordinates with the states. Everybody's in the loop. This just adds paperwork. And when they say that, I want one legislator in that room to ask one question. Show us the Oman agreement then. Not a summary, not a fact sheet, not a press release with a photograph of two people at a table. Show us the document. Then watch what happens. Now, problem one, the president. I need this part, I need you to understand, because it's the argument that makes this movement more than a protest. A president who believes that he can bomb any nation on earth by himself still has to do it with somebody. See, Trump, we've seen the t-shirts of him standing on a Tyrannosaurus Rex with a machine gun, or on top of a tank, or flying a jet. AI is funny that way, I guess. But he can't fly the sorties himself. He can't load the bombs himself. He can't fuel the tankers. He can't guard the perimeters. He can't run the comms. Can't drive the trucks. Can't man the air defense batteries themselves. He needs manpower. He needs airframes. He needs the force. And a large percentage of that total force structure, in many areas approaching half of it, is in the National Guard. Now, let me give you some specifics, because the specifics are actually worse than the generality. The National Guard is roughly 38% of the total military force structure of the United States. The Army National Guard is about a third of the total Army. And in 2014, Congressman Joe Wilson told the House that there were times during Operation Iraqi Freedom when the Army National Guard represented 50% of the Army's total combat power. Half of the Army's combat power. Citizen soldiers, men and women who enlisted at armories in their hometown to serve their states. And for an air war like the one we're in now, the kind we're fighting in Iran right now, it's even worse, because the Air National Guard provides 65% of the required tactical airlift for the United States Air Force. More than half of the aerial refueling airframes in this country sit in the Guard and Reserve. 65% of the airlift, 65%, more than half of the tankers. You see, you can't run an air campaign 8,000 miles from home without airlift and without tankers. It's just not possible. Not for a week, not for a day, not for a minute. Which means the unilateral executive theory is not self-executing either. It runs on the National Guard. It runs on your neighbor, on the guy who fixed the road after the flood, on the woman who works at the credit union 4 days a week and then flies a KC-135 on the weekend. There's 50 state legislatures who hold the enlistment contracts, the armories, the officers, the authority. 50 state legislatures can say, not from this state, not in that war, not without a declaration. And when enough of them do, that theory, that unitary executive theory, it dies. Not in a courtroom, not on an election, but in a supply chain problem. That's the whole strategy. That's always been the strategy. The president of the United States can claim any power he likes on paper. He cannot fight a war that the states will not staff. If we won't give him the warm bodies, he just can't do it. So 20 plus states have already introduced this bill. It's actually over 30, I believe now. Arizona Senate has passed it 3 times. It's the first legislative chamber in the country to do so, and it's died in the House each time. South Carolina, Minnesota, Vermont, Texas, Oklahoma, Idaho ran it multiple times. The readiness argument and the war in Iran became the death knell. But it's not going to stay dead. Because this year, the case comes with the photograph of the community college professor in a palace in Oman and a president threatening to bomb the building that she signed the contract in. All right, let me bring this home. In 2006, I was standing on a mountain in the Pesh River Valley in Afghanistan with a satellite phone in my hand. I called the governor of Idaho because the chain of command above me in Afghanistan had run out of answers, and frankly, my men had run out of boots. I've told this story a bunch of times. You can find it on any one of the social channels. I called the governor because the governor is the commander-in-chief of the National Guard. That was not a technicality to me. That was the reason that we actually got the help that we needed. You see, 2 shipping containers showed up with all the supplies we need about a week later, and my battalion commander kicked in my door and took away my satellite phone as punishment. But I handed it over happily because my guys got what they needed, and they got it from the commander-in-chief of the Idaho National Guard. 20 years later, the governor of Tennessee, he stood at a podium and could not tell the people of Tennessee where their own National Guardsmen were deployed or if they were involved in epic fury in Iran. He didn't know. And the governor of Arizona, she flew to Muscat, Oman. She called herself the commander-in-chief in her own press release, and she watched as a community college professor signed her militia over to a Persian Gulf Sultanate. And then she went on tour at a museum. See, that's the distance that we've traveled. Nobody invaded the United States. There was no coup. It happened through 100 small transfers. Each one was reasonable on the day that it happened until the militia of the several states became a personnel pool for one man's foreign policy. Signed over by administrators in palaces, aligned with 115 foreign ministries by 2 cabinet signatures, and deployable to any continent on a Tuesday morning by a direct order. What I need from you tonight, I need 3 things. Number 1, go to defendtheguard.us and click on your state. Find out whether somebody in your legislature is already carrying this bill. Most of you will find a name. Send that person a short message, 2 sentences. I'm a constituent. I support Defend the Guard. Thank you for carrying it. That's the whole message. You have no idea what that does for a legislator who has spent 3 sessions being told by generals that he or she is endangering national security. But then stay in it a little bit longer. Get on their newsletter. Show up at a town hall event that they're putting on. Ask about the bill in public, where other people can hear the answer. Be the reason it gets filed again next session. And if your state has no sponsor, you've just found your new project. Call your own representative and ask them to be the first to carry it. And number 2, if you're in Arizona, I've handed you the entire argument tonight. You have the photograph, you have the dates, you have both generals' names and their laughable resumes. You have the governor's own press release. Now, I want you to know who's been carrying this fight for you in Phoenix. It's State Senator Lieutenant Colonel Wendy Rogers. United States Air Force, retired, 20 years of active duty. One of the first 100 women pilots in the Air Force. She earned her wings at Williams Air Force Base right there in Arizona in 1981. She flew C-141s on worldwide airlift and humanitarian missions. She taught cadets to fly at the Air Force Academy. She flew Learjets in Europe. She led 3 operational divisions at headquarters U.S. Air Force Europe. She spent 6 months running the Bosnian airlift. She has 3,000 hours of jet time. The Defense Meritorious Service Medal, a master's degree in national security studies. I want you to notice something because it's not a coincidence. I spent much of the last 20 minutes telling you that the Air National Guard carries 65% of the nation's tactical airlift and that no president fights an air war 8,000 miles from home without it. Wendy Rogers, she flew that airlift. She ran an airlift. She's forgotten more about how this country actually moves in a war than every witness who has ever testified against the bill. She's the sponsor of the Defend the Guard bill in Arizona. She's been a stalwart on this legislation, and she has taken the lead on it nationally. She is the one who sat in that committee room and asked an employment HR lawyer to name a single official and then sat there while he couldn't do any of it. We support her efforts on this bill. Without legislators willing to do what she has done, to take the hits, to absorb the ridicule, to file it again the next session and the next one. This movement doesn't exist in any state. So for her, do two things. Go to wendyrogers.org and see for yourself what she stands for. Read it in her own words, not mine. And let her know that Arizonans are behind the bill, and ask her to file the parallel bill, the Guard Sovereignty Act, advice and consent, because Arizona is where the story broke, and Arizona should be where the answer starts. We need people like her carrying this bill in all 50 states. And if your legislature has somebody with that kind of spine, find them. If it doesn't, go build one. Number 3, share this. And if you can, chip in. Send this to somebody, not to a political person, to a parent, somebody with a kid in the Guard, because parents figure out fastest that nobody they ever voted for has any say in where their kid gets deployed. And if you can spare it, go to bringourtroopshome.us or defendtheguard.us and chip in a few bucks. I want to be honest with you about how this works. We are not funded by a defense contractor. We do not have a foundation behind us. There is no billionaire writing checks to help keep this show on the air or to keep our work in progress. This organization we run on small dollar donors, $5, $10, $25 a month. That's the whole model. And it's the reason that we can say on camera what nobody else in this space will say. 50 state capitals is where we fight. 2 bills. And a handful of us and whoever else we can convince. You know, we can't do it without you. And they put the war power, our founding fathers did, they put the war power in Congress because they had seen what one man does when he has control of that type of authority and power. They put treaties in the Senate because they had seen what one man does with those as well. We've built a country where one man does both, where the paperwork on the second one gets signed by a community college professor 8,000 miles from anybody who could be voted out over it. 2 problems, but we offer the solution, a single solution. And it's not a bill, it's a place. Stop fighting the empire where it has never lost. Fight it in 50 state houses where they have to win every single time, and we only have to win once. 50 states, 50 legislatures, 2 bills traveling in tandem. Let's take it back. For the Constitution, let's bring our troops home. See you next time.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.